You wake up one day and realize something terrifying. You didn't ruin your life overnight. You drifted into it. Slowly, quietly, without resistance. That's how most men fall, not through catastrophe, not through one massive mistake, not through some dramatic collapse, but through drift, a slow surrender to gravity. And the dangerous part about drift is this: it feels natural, because gravity always feels natural. If you drop a stone, it falls. If you stop steering a ship, it drifts. If you stop training your body, it weakens. And if you stop governing yourself, your life begins moving in directions you never consciously chose. Most men think destruction is loud. It isn't. Destruction is subtle. It's waking up tired and saying, "I'll start tomorrow." It's scrolling for 3 hours without realizing it. It's abandoning routines, one compromise at a time. It's letting your standards slowly erode, while convincing yourself nothing is wrong. That is drift. And drift is dangerous because it disguises itself as comfort. But comfort has gravity. Everything undisciplined eventually falls downward. A neglected mind, a neglected body, a neglected spirit, a neglected purpose. Nothing stays still. Everything either rises through intentional resistance or falls through passive decay. That is one of the harshest truths a man can learn. You do not rise naturally. You fall naturally. Rising requires force, direction, awareness, resistance. A man floating downstream might think he's at peace, but peace and passivity are not the same thing. A dead leaf also floats downstream. The disciplined man understands something most people never realize. Your life is always moving, even when it feels like nothing is happening, even when the days blur together, even when every week feels the same. Your life is moving. The question is not whether you are changing. The question is, what are you becoming? Because unconscious patterns become destiny. The life you repeat becomes the life you own. Every action teaches your nervous system who you are. Every repeated thought becomes mental architecture. Every compromise becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. Most men never decide who they want to be. They simply become the result of what they repeatedly do. That's why passive decay is so dangerous. You rarely notice it while it's happening. A man doesn't wake up one morning weak. He slowly stops resisting weakness. He stops waking up early, stops reading, stops training, stops creating, stops reflecting, stops questioning himself, stops demanding more from himself. And because the changes are small, they feel harmless. Until one day, he looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the man staring back. Then comes the question, what happened to me? But life already answered that question years ago. You drifted. Mental momentum works the same way. A train moving in one direction becomes harder and harder to stop. That applies to discipline, but it also applies to destruction. One lazy day becomes two. Two becomes a week. A week becomes a month. A month becomes a lifestyle. And eventually, the lifestyle becomes an identity. Momentum compounds, not because life is cruel, not because the universe is against you, but because repetition becomes belief, and belief becomes behavior, and behavior becomes identity. That's the terrifying power of unconscious patterns. Eventually, you stop choosing. You simply become. That is why awareness is power. The self-aware man notices the drift before it becomes destiny. He notices the late nights, the excuses, the emotional eating, the endless scrolling, the loss of focus, the growing numbness, the quiet dissatisfaction, the feeling that something is off even when nothing appears wrong. He notices because disciplined men observe themselves. Weak men avoid themselves. Most people spend their entire lives distracted, not because they're busy, because distraction protects them from self-confrontation. It's easier to scroll, easier to consume, easier to escape than it is to sit alone and ask difficult questions. Am I growing? Am I drifting? Am I becoming the person I said I would become? Most people never ask. And because they never ask, they never correct. And because they never correct, they slowly surrender control. They wake up, consume, react, escape, repeat. And they call that living. But they are not living intentionally. They are operating on programming, patterns, habits, emotional loops, comfort cycles. They are being pulled by gravity instead of guided by purpose. And gravity never negotiates. It doesn't care about your goals. It doesn't care about your potential. It doesn't care about the promises you made yourself at 2 o'clock in the morning. Gravity simply pulls downward, always downward. The moment resistance disappears, gravity takes over. That's true in nature, and it's true in your life. Leave a garden unattended, and weeds appear. Leave your body unattended, and weakness appears. Leave your mind unattended, and distraction appears. Leave your purpose unattended, and confusion appears. Nothing stays elevated on its own. Everything falls when effort disappears. This is the lie most people never recognize. They believe staying the same is neutral. It isn't. There is no neutral. You are either growing or drifting, building or decaying, ascending or descending. Life is movement. The question is only, which direction? Modern life understands this. In fact, entire industries are built around it. Your attention is being competed for every second of every day. Not because attention is valuable, because attention becomes direction, and direction becomes destiny. Think about it. Every notification, every endless feed, every autoplay video, every manufactured outrage, every carefully engineered distraction, they all have the same objective: to pull your attention away from what matters. Because a distracted man is easy to guide, easy to influence, easy to control. But a focused man is difficult to manipulate. That is why attention has become one of the most valuable resources on Earth. And most people are giving it away for free. The frightening part is that gravity rarely feels dangerous. It feels comfortable. Sleeping in feels comfortable. Avoiding difficult conversations feels comfortable. Putting things off feels comfortable. Escaping into entertainment feels comfortable. Remaining the same feels comfortable. That's why comfort can become a trap. Not because comfort is evil, but because comfort asks nothing from you. And what asks nothing from you eventually takes everything from you. Most men believe their biggest enemy is failure. It isn't. Their biggest enemy is unconsciousness. Because failure can teach you. Failure can wake you up. Failure can force growth. But unconsciousness allows years to disappear. One day becomes another. Another becomes a month. A month becomes a year. A year becomes a decade. And suddenly the person you wanted to become exists only in your imagination. Not because you lacked ability, not because you lacked intelligence, not because you lacked potential, but because gravity was stronger than your awareness. This is why disciplined people appear different. Not because they possess some secret, not because they have more motivation, not because they enjoy suffering. They simply understand gravity. They understand that left alone, their mind will drift. Their habits will drift. Their standards will drift. Their attention will drift. So they build resistance, systems, boundaries, routines, standards, non-negotiables. Not because they enjoy structure, because structure creates direction, and direction defeats drift. The disciplined man does not trust how he feels. He trusts what he has decided. Because feelings change. Energy changes. Motivation changes. Circumstances change. But principles remain. And eventually, something remarkable happens. The same force that once worked against him begins working for him. Momentum. Because momentum works both ways. The man drifting downward gains momentum toward decay. But the man moving upward gains momentum toward growth. One workout creates another. One disciplined morning creates another. One difficult decision creates another. One promise kept to yourself creates another. And eventually, discipline becomes easier than drift. Not because gravity disappeared, because momentum changed sides. And that is when everything begins to change. If moment you recognize the drift, everything changes. Not because your life changes immediately, not because your problems disappear, not because you suddenly become disciplined, but because now you can see. And a man who can see cannot be controlled as easily as a man who is asleep. Awareness is where freedom begins. Not action, not motivation, awareness. Because before you can change your direction, you must first recognize the direction you're already moving. Most people never do. They remain trapped in reaction, reacting to emotions, reacting to circumstances, reacting to impulses, reacting to whatever demands their attention in the moment. And reaction creates drift. But direction begins with intention. Every meaningful change starts with a decision, not a feeling, a decision. The decision to become conscious, the decision to pay attention, the decision to stop outsourcing responsibility for your life. Because the truth is, no one is coming to rescue you. No mentor, no opportunity, no relationship, no amount of motivation, no perfect moment. At some point, every man must take hold of the wheel himself. That is the beginning of self-governance. Not controlling everything. No man can do that. But controlling what can be controlled. Your attention, your actions, your habits, your standards, your response to life. That is where power lives. Most men overestimate dramatic change and underestimate small corrections. They think transformation happens through one massive breakthrough, one life-changing decision, one perfect plan. But life rarely works that way. A plane changes its destination by adjusting only a few degrees, not hundreds. And a man does the same. One earlier morning, one workout, one difficult conversation, one book chapter, one promise kept to himself. Small corrections, repeated consistently. That is how direction is reclaimed. This is what most people misunderstand about discipline. Discipline is not intensity. It is alignment. Intensity burns hot, then disappears. Alignment endures. The disciplined man is not perfect. He misses days. He loses focus. He gets tired. He makes mistakes. But he keeps correcting. Again and again and again. because he understands something powerful. Being off course is not the danger. Remaining off course is. That realization changes everything, because now failure loses its power. Mistakes lose their power. Setbacks lose their power. Why? Because every setback becomes information. Every mistake becomes feedback. Every drift becomes another opportunity to realign. The self-governed man is not defined by perfection. He is defined by correction. That is why awareness must become a daily practice, not a one-time realization. A daily practice. Every morning asking, where is my attention? What am I becoming? What am I reinforcing? What am I tolerating? What direction am I moving? These questions seem small, but they create consciousness, and consciousness interrupts drift. The modern world wants your attention scattered, because scattered people are easier to influence, easier to sell to, easier to distract, easier to control. But a man with direction becomes difficult to move, because he knows where he is going, and more importantly, he knows why. Purpose changes everything. A man without purpose seeks comfort. A man with purpose can endure discomfort. A man without purpose chases relief. A man with purpose accepts resistance. A man without purpose reacts. A man with purpose chooses. That is the difference. Direction is not found. Direction is chosen. Again, and again, and again. Every single day. And eventually, the man who once drifted through life becomes the man steering it. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but intentionally. And intention is where freedom begins. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes something. No one is coming. Not because the world is cruel, not because people don't care, but because some responsibilities were always his. No one can build his discipline for him. No one can think his thoughts for him. No one can govern his attention for him. No one can choose his direction for him. That responsibility has always belonged to him. And strangely, that realization is not depressing. It's liberating. Because the moment you stop waiting, you start building. The moment you stop blaming, you start taking ownership. The moment you stop drifting, you start steering. That is where life begins. Not when circumstances become perfect, not when motivation finally arrives, not when fear disappears, not when the path becomes clear. Life begins the moment a man accepts responsibility for himself, because responsibility creates power, and power creates choice. Most people spend their lives believing freedom means having no obligations. But real freedom is different. Real freedom is the ability to govern yourself, to direct your attention, to control your actions, to choose your response regardless of circumstance. That is freedom. And that freedom is earned, not given. The world will always offer distractions, always offer shortcuts, always offer comfort, always offer reasons to wait. But eventually, every man must decide what kind of life he wants to build. Not tomorrow, not someday, today. Because every day is a vote for who you are becoming, a vote for what you value, a vote for the future you are creating. Whether you realize it or not, you are casting those votes already. The question is, are you voting consciously? Years from now, you will become someone. That part is guaranteed. Time will make sure of it. The only uncertainty is who. Will you become the man who reacted to life, or the man who directed it? The man who drifted with the current, or the man who chose his course? The man who surrendered to gravity, or the man who built the strength to resist it? Because every day, gravity is pulling. Every day, momentum is building. Every day, patterns are forming. Every day, a future version of you is being created. The process never stops. The question is whether you are participating in it consciously. Perhaps that is the real purpose of discipline. Not punishment, not restriction, not suffering. Awareness. The ability to wake up, to notice, to choose, to direct, to become. Because the greatest tragedy is not failure. The greatest tragedy is unconsciousness, living an entire life without ever truly deciding who you wanted to be. So pay attention. Guard your direction. Protect your attention. Question your patterns. Challenge your excuses. Audit your momentum. And whenever you notice yourself drifting, correct the course. Not with shame, not with self-hatred, not with guilt, with awareness. Because awareness creates choice, and choice creates direction, and direction creates destiny. You do not need to become a different person overnight. You only need to stop surrendering the wheel. One decision, one correction, one intentional day at a time. Because the moment a man becomes conscious, the drift loses its power. And for the first time, he is no longer being carried by life. Now, he is carrying himself.